Cold Water is my fifth film. And yes, it's a major change. It's a major change coming at the right moment for me. It's like I felt I had gone all the way in my initial original approach of cinema and felt its limits. And I just needed to go beyond. I had no idea how. It comes after my fourth feature, which was a movie called Une Nouvelle Vie, which I shot in CinemaScope. It was a very abstract film, very dark. Very dark and violent in its own way, and eventually confused, and which says a lot about where the place I was at in terms of my life and my art. But at least it was a very, it was. I felt I was just shaking up the texture of my films, taking risks, but taking the wrong risks in retrospect. But what was the worst part of the experience of making that film was the weight of the camera. Because CinemaScope, very little focus, very little profondeur de champ, depth of field, sorry, very little depth of field, hours to set up very complex shot. I mean, just the weight of the technique of cinema was just unbearable. I just got to a point, I just hated it. Could not stand it anymore, and I had to invent a different way to make movies for myself, which came through this movie that was initially commissioned by TV. I mean, it was not like any kind of heavy-handed thing. I mean, they asked me if I wanted to make a 45-minute film in the context of a series of similar films made by French directors of various generations. So, like, they asked 10 filmmakers to make a movie about their teenage years and the kind of music they were listening at the time. And I kind of grabbed the opportunity. I said, give me the same budget. I won't do a 45-minute film. I will make an experimental 90-minute film. And then I will cut a shorter version of 45 minutes that will be perfect for the small screen. So it was a completely experimental way of making films. It was for the first time I functioned with a small 16mm handheld camera, much lighter. There was not this issue of weight anymore. Only kids, meaning no hair, no makeup. They got dressed by themselves. No rehearsal, anything. I mean, just keep it completely natural, completely spontaneous, and we shot in 24 days, which is really very little, less than 24. But beyond the technical aspect of it, the door it opened for me was also the door of autobiography. Cold Water is not an autobiographical film the way a movie like Something in the Air is an autobiographical film. But it's for the first time I had the opportunity to deal in a very literal fashion with actual events from my own life, and all of a sudden it just, I mean, I don't know. I would not have dared to go in that place on my own. But the fact that it was part of the commission, why not? I mean, it kind of gave me a carte blanche, to go that route, and all of a sudden it opened up new ways of thinking, new ways of making movies, a new approach also to acting, and then basically it made me a very different filmmaker. I mean, it's like a second chapter in my work.
And I think your cinematographer Denis Lenoir talked about the actual way you would set up shots changed in that film too, with the much longer takes. Can you talk about
much longer takes, and also the thing that I just hated when we were doing a Nouvelle Vie because of all those depth field problems. I mean, we had marks on the floor everywhere. Like actors would move from one cross on the floor to another cross on the floor to a third cross on the floor. And after that film, I just decided I just don't want to see any mark on the floor on any of my film ever in my life. So that was the approach to Cold Water.
And I guess one of the things that's most striking about all of your films, I think, is that the way you use music in your films. And you use it in so many different ways. I think in Something in the Air, well, an example of one way you use it in Something in the Air is you'll use a song over that doesn't come from the source, but you'll use it over a scene, or sometimes to bridge a few scenes together into a sequence. In Le Foie, you use it, I think, almost primarily as source.
It's the only source.
Yeah, and then in, I believe it's in Irma you use Bonnie and Clyde in the party as a source, but then it bridges over into the following scene. And then one of the ones I find really striking is actually in Carlos, because I believe it's the Feelies, Loveless Love, when you introduce Carlos. And it's not a very well-known song, but it almost feels as though it could be a score for that whole sequence to introduce him. Can you talk about the different ways?
I've always had a difficult relationship with scoring my films. I started as many filmmakers in a very naive way. Like my first feature, there was a line that said, in the budget, that said, score. So we hired someone to write a score, and he gave us his music, and we put it in the film. Gabriel Yaret, he's a great musician, by the way. But I had no clear notion of what film music was about, except the fact that in movies you have music. But it was not clearer than that for me. That if you did not have music in your film, it didn't feel like a movie or something, which was the worst possible reason. And so in my first film, Désordre, you have the two dimensions. You have the score written by Gabriel Yared on one side, and then you have the songs. I mean, because it's a movie about the indie rock scene of the 80s, and there's a lot of the stuff I was listening at the time, which in many ways was much more connected to the way I've been using music since. I started having problems with music when I made my second film, Winter Child, where I had a score written also again by a very good musician, Jorge Arriagada, who's a Chilean who wrote a lot of very good music for Raúl Ruiz. After I finished the film, I just felt horribly bad about the score. I felt, because it was a melodrama, it was kind of a modern melodrama, but still it had a melodramatic structure, and using melodramatic music in a melodrama, it just felt overstated, it felt wrong, it felt fake, and to this point I haven't really reconciled with the way I used the music on that film. So the next step, sorry, but it has to be a long answer because it's a fairly complex issue for me. On my third film, my approach was okay, now I'm going to use the music from a musician I admire. So I will call John Cale. I mean, I've been listening to his records. I mean, we're not just talking about the Velvet Underground album. I just loved his whole solo career, and especially one music of orchestral music he published very early called The Academy in Peril. And I thought, I love the music in The Academy in Peril. Why not ask John Cale to score my film? And he wrote a score which I liked, which was contrapunctual. I mean, it was just not. It was it was not underlying the dramatic elements. It was in some other place. I was using it not exactly in places you use music normally, and so on and so forth. But still, it still had this quartet format, and which ends up being the most conventional form of film score. So again, I did not use much of his music in the film, but I was not so glad, I mean, not so satisfied with the outcome. So the next film I decided to completely cut, to have like no music at all. So Une Nouvelle Vie has like no music. It's just like not even source music. And after that film, starting from L'Eau Froide, I started very shyly, very gradually using music again, only as source music. And I never really worked with a musician again. The only actual score written for any of my films ever since is for Demon Lover, when I worked with Sonic Youth. But it was a completely different approach. I mean, for me, it was a completely different film, and I just wanted to try new things. So I decided that the film needed a score, but a very specific score, meaning something that would be halfway between noise and music, something that would mingle with the sound design, where there would be really no difference between the actual score and the sound design, meaning that the Sonic Youth sent me also sounds. They send me stuff. I mean, they were, recordings they did of just noises in the street or something, which I mean, everything was treated on a similar level, and then ended up mixed in the final film. But I don't want to go too far away in terms of just a technique. But the very interesting aspect of it was that they were working on Pro Tools, which is like the sound machines that musicians use, and which is also the sound machine sound designers in film use. So it's they sent us their music in the form of Pro Tools sessions that we could just import in our own sound design, and meaning we had access to every single layer of the music, and we could remix every single layer of their music to integrate it ourselves in any way we considered fit, in the soundtrack of the film. So it was a very, very special approach to using music, and it was. I never did it again since, but I loved the experience, and I'm just very happy with the job they did.
And was Sonic Youth at all involved in that?
They were involved in. So we. The idea is that I sent them the screenplay, and they wrote material based on the screenplay, which they sent us and which I gave to the crew and to the actors. I mean, they gave, we had CDs, and it was not MP3 at that point. And then when we started shooting, we would send them every week a DVD with one take of every shot almost. So and they would send us stuff back, and it was like back and forth. And once the movie was finished, we went to the studio which was still in Murray Street at that point, and we worked with them on the images to add things which we kept or not in the final mix. But they were really organically involved in the process.